Welcome back. A showdown is brewing on Capitol Hill over the Save America Act, the Republican-backed legislation requiring voter ID and proof of citizenship to register to vote. President Trump has given Republicans an ultimatum: pass the act or he won't sign any new legislation. Senate Majority Leader John Thune says he doesn't have the votes to pass it in the Senate, but the president's pressure seems to be reaching some vulnerable Republicans. Senator John Cornyn, who is locked in a competitive primary runoff race in Texas and has been waiting for the president's endorsement, wrote an op-ed overnight saying after years of defending the Senate's 60-vote filibuster rule, he is now siding with the president, who wants to change the rules to get this bill passed. Senator Cornyn blaming Democrats, writing, quote, "I believe the Democrats, with their votes and statements, have already dealt the filibuster a fatal blow. The Senate rules will change eventually, whether Republicans like it or not. Democrats started this fight. Now Republicans should finish it." Joining me now is NBC News Chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles. Ryan, thanks so much for being here. So put this all into context for us. Just how significant is this shift from the senator?
I think it's very significant, Kristen, and I think it demonstrates the kind of heat that John Cornyn is facing in this Republican primary in Texas. And make no mistake, this is about the process. It's not about the underlying policy. The SAVE Act or the Save America Act, whichever version of this bill that comes to the Senate floor, will definitely get at least 51 Republican votes. The issue is whether or not it's worth blowing up the filibuster over and then setting a precedent that could come back to haunt Republicans in the future. And there simply aren't 51 Republicans that are willing to take that step of getting rid of the filibuster. For a long time, John Cornyn was in that camp, argued that if you got rid of the filibuster and Democrats took the majority, they could do things like pack the Supreme Court. Things are a lot different now that he is in this heated primary. And our Brendan Leach pressed him on it today, and this is how he responded.
What would you say to those who say you just changed your mind to win the president's endorsement?
I'd say that's not true.
You also said that if
I think we're through. Go ahead. Go away.
Obviously not something that he wanted to talk about. Throughout the day, we have subsequently pressed him a little bit more on this. And while he told Brennan that he didn't care or wasn't about winning the president's endorsement, he said today that he hoped the president saw it and the president appreciated it, which I guess is not an explicit quid pro quo, but there's certainly something to be said about the position that he finds himself in. Now, at the end of the day, though, Kristen, I think it's important to point out there is no realistic path to blowing up the filibuster at this point. You may not get 30 Republican senators to tell you on the record that they're opposed to passing the filibuster or getting rid of the filibuster, but I can tell you from my own reporting, there is just not the appetite to take that dramatic of a step, especially for a piece of legislation like this.
Yeah, it always comes down to the votes, and it's always uphill once you start counting them when it comes to changing the filibuster. President Trump reacted to Leader Thune saying he doesn't have the votes to pass the Save America Act. I'm going to play it. Ryan, get your reaction on the other side. Take a look.
He's got to be a leader, you know? If he's a leader, he's got to get him. It's the most popular bill I've ever seen put before Congress.
So how exactly do you see this all playing out, Ryan?
Well, it's interesting that the president said that today, because 2 days ago at Doral in Florida, he told me that he knew that it was going to require Democrat votes in order to pass it, essentially admitting that there was no path to passing the SAVE Act by blowing up the filibuster. And there's just no way that Democrats are going to support this legislation as it currently stands. Right now, I think this is going to continue to be a stalemate. There is the real possibility, the likelihood that the Republican leadership will put it on the floor next week, if anything, to force Democrats into a position where they vote no on something like requiring a photo ID when you come to vote. But at the end of the day, I think there is a lot of misinformation that's being spread on the internet about the feasibility of this legislation passing, many of it being peddled by some of the president's strongest supporters, and I think giving a false hope to rank and file Republicans who think that this bill could actually become law in the near future. At this point, it's just not feasible, Kristen.
All right, Ryan Nobles, thank you so much for your reporting. Appreciate it. Joining me now is Republican Senator from North Dakota, Kevin Cramer. Senator Cramer, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So I want to start off by getting your reaction to Senator Cornyn, his op-ed saying he will now support whatever changes to Senate rules are necessary to pass the Save America Act. What do you make of his change in position? He was initially opposed to getting rid of the filibuster.
Well, one of the great things about our system of governance, self-governance, is that we listen carefully to our constituents, and come every 6 years, if you want to run for re-election, you are all the more attentive. But one of the other great things about the United States Senate is that we have 6-year terms, and only a third of us are up every 2 years, and that's by design, so that we can look out for the country, look out for the institutions that govern this country and that preserve this country. And coming from a small state like I do, where we have 2 senators, just like Texas has 2 senators, but we don't have 60 House members, protecting the power of the Senate is really, really important. So we all come from different places, different perspectives. At the end of the day, I think Ryan's reporting is right on point. There are not the votes to blow up the filibuster.
Yeah, and you have long expressed your opposition to blowing up the filibuster for the argument that you just made, because you think it's important to represent a state like North Dakota. Let me read you something that you said back when Democrats were talking about this in 2022, when they wanted to change it potentially over the Voting Rights Act. You said the Democrats have created a fake crisis. These attempts to undermine the integrity of the U.S. Senate are purely designed to tilt the scales in Democrats' favor for future election. Do you see Republicans now doing the same thing, Senator?
I think presidents, when they have the opportunity with the majority of their party in the Senate, they'd like to talk about getting rid of the filibuster to advance their agenda. Completely understandable. Presidents are presidents. But what's special about the United States Senate, as I've just said, is the fact that we represent states, and small states have equal representation, and to give up that power doesn't make any sense. And by the way, remember, Democrats tried to do this just a couple of years ago, to that quote, to do, of all things, federalize elections. And now we're trying to do the same thing. And I support the Save America Act. I'm a co-sponsor of the Save America Act. I think the principles embedded in it make all of the sense in the world. And they're all the principles that the state of North Dakota has in our elections in the state of North Dakota. And more states ought to do that. But the filibuster is more important than any one issue that we would vote on, or any policy we'd try to change.
Well, let me read you what President Trump said earlier this week. He told at a Florida retreat House Republicans on Monday that if the Save America Act passes, quote, Democrats probably won't win an election for 50 years and maybe longer. Do you think the president's message actually undermines getting the bill passed and the goal of the overall bill?
Well, it certainly wouldn't have inspired any Democrats to vote for the bill if that was his goal, but I'm pretty sure that probably wasn't his goal. Having said that, I'm not even sure that that statement would actually be the outcome. Perhaps it would help, but I think the thing that I keep going back to is, in North Dakota, for example, we've just become more and more Republican with every election. In California, they've become more and more Democratic with every election. It's a big, diverse country that goes through various cycles. And I just think it's the greatest experiment in the world, and I don't really see any reason why we would manipulate it this way. I think it's insane that people shouldn't have to show an ID to vote when they have to show an ID to do a whole bunch of other things. But if California wants to run itself that way, that's, I suppose, up to them. I would vote for the Save America Act. I wouldn't blow up the filibuster to do it.
So you support the Save America Act. The president has added on new provisions to the bill, including what he has said, no men and women's sports, no gender affirming care for minors. Do you support those amendments? What do they have to do with voting?
Well, one of the things that does do is it does add other issues that probably maybe they attract some more votes, but it probably distracts as many as it would attract. I support all of those principles. Again, I would vote for the bill with those amendments in them. I'd vote for the bill without those amendments in them. There's nothing in there that's a poison pill to me personally. However, the goal of legislating is to pass bills, and so if it adds value to the bill, great. If it doesn't, that's fine as well. I just think that at this point, there's not a chance that this bill is going to pass. I'm happy to vote on it. I'm happy to get everybody on the record on it. Like I said, we'll vote. By the way, Kristen, I'd welcome a talking filibuster, and I told the whip that last night. If you want to keep us here for 2, 3, 4 months, holding up the Senate floor on this one issue because it's that important, I'll participate. I don't think it'll have a great outcome or be productive for the United States Senate, but I'd be willing to do it. I just don't think there are enough people that are willing to do that either.
I want to turn to Iran now. President Trump saying he can leave whenever he deems that it's an appropriate time. This is what your colleague, Senator Josh Hawley, had to say about the war yesterday. Take a look.
We have totally destroyed forever their nuclear program. We have destroyed their ballistic missiles. We have destroyed their Navy. It's been astounding. It's been historic. And now it's time to declare victory.
Do you think it is time to get out of Iran, or do you agree with the argument Ambassador Bolton was making, which is that if the United States leaves before there's actual regime change, the outcome would be worse than if it hadn't gone in at all?
So, Kristen, I would find a position somewhere between those two, to be honest with you. I do think if you're going to pull 90% of the weeds out of your garden, but leave a small portion for weeds, you're going to have a weedy garden. And I think that's what would happen if we were to leave now. I do think that, to Ambassador Bolton's point, and by the way, great interview, we have to destroy the institutions that support the regime. I don't think we can determine who should be elected in a free country, because that's what we want to accomplish, is a free Iran. That's up to the people. But I do think destroying more of the institutions is paramount. And frankly, the last 10% is the hardest 10% to get, on the one hand. On the other hand, it does provide us now with our superior weapons, the bigger bombs, the gravity bombs, to destroy other institutions, other installations that we can identify, along with, of course, our friends in Israel. We've already created an environment for change in Iran, but I'd hate to see us leave a week early, only to leave the regime in charge and to have, at the end of the day, not accomplished as much as we could by staying another week or whatever it takes to make sure that the people have their decision to make, not us making it for them.
Very quickly, as you know, there is a lot of concern inside the administration, Republican circles, about the fact that gas prices are going up, the disruption to global markets. Do you think the president has it in him to continue to watch these gas and oil prices go up and stay in Iran to finish the job? Or do you think the political cost could ultimately be too great?
Well, obviously, the geopolitics of it, to include the economic politics of it, are part of the calculation. Although the one thing we have going for us now is that we are producing more oil in the United States than we ever have, and I think there's even more opportunity to do that. I think we need to refine more of our oil here in the United States and have refineries capable of doing that. But that's a longer-term plan, but I think we ought to be about that, so that we are truly not just dominant, not just secure energy-wise, but we're actually independent. In other words, we don't need the oil from other places to affect our prices, and we become the price maker instead of the price taker. Having said that, using some of the reserves, I suppose, could be helpful. Maybe there's some other things that we can do, but I'm not worried about the moment. Frankly, I think this spike is understandable, but I also think that in the long run, it is worth whatever the price is in the next short to midterm.
All right, Senator Kevin Cramer, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Kristen.
And coming up, what happens when 17 candidates from 4 different parties all compete on the same ballot in a special election? We'll tell you next. You're watching Meet the Press Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or watch live on our YouTube channel.